Welcome to the NCDWI Guide podcast, where defenders of the Constitution assemble to prepare for courtroom battle and firm owners gather to develop marketing strategies that will revolutionize the practice of criminal defense. Here's your host, the NCDWI guy, Jake Minnick.
Hello, fellow freedom fighters, and welcome to episode 82 of the NCDWI Guide podcast. On today's episode, we have a very special guest joining us, Judge Robert Conrad, federal judge in Charlotte, North Carolina. Judge Conrad is joining us today to talk about his amazing new book that he has just published, Keeping Their Souls While Losing Their Heads, a recollection of the great saints John Fisher and Thomas More. I'm going to introduce Judge Conrad with the intro that is in the book that has been published. Robert J. Bob Conrad Jr. is a trial judge, ex-federal prosecutor, former ACC college basketball player, father, grandfather, coach, mentor, teacher, and amateur historian who examines the lives of John Fisher and Thomas More with a trial lawyer's love for advocacy and an Irishman's love for a well-told story. He brings to life Thomas More and John Fisher's examples of fidelity to a well-formed conscience, vision of eternal life with God, and willingness to die rather than submit to a raw exercise of royal power. The father of 5 children and grandfather to 10 at last count, Judge Conrad hopes that the lessons he learned from More and Fisher might resonate with his family and the readers of his work. And with that, we're excited again to have Judge Conrad on the podcast to talk about these great saints. Thank you so much, Judge, for joining us and talking about these great men.
Jake, I'm delighted to be here. I have to add one addition to that bio, and that was pointed out by my wife, that I am also the husband to Ann Conrad for the last 41 years.
That's a good one to bring out. We got to make sure about that. So it's actually really cool to hear about how the life of particularly Thomas More has kind of played out in terms of your own kind of family life and what that has looked like, the different examples that you could bring in personally. So I think it's really cool how some of these saints just very much connect to who we are as human beings and in our own state of life. So we'll get to talk about that a little bit. Also, we again, great ACC career in Clemson. You got all the big stats, leader in steals when you left and assists. Is that right?
Yeah, that also was 40 years ago. And so that has probably gotten all the mileage it can get.
That's right.
And we can probably move forward from there pretty quickly.
That's right.
I was known as the only ACC basketball player at the time whose grade point average was higher than his points per game. So I don't know that that's a great career to be talking about 40 years later.
Well, I love that. Well, I think maybe a good place for us to start, Judge, in terms of this conversation, in terms of setting a little bit of a backdrop, is I'm just going to read the first couple of paragraphs from the introduction and then let you kind of introduce who these 2 great saints are. One of the things that I think is so amazing about the work as you've laid it out is you are a great storyteller. It really is. I felt like I got to hear, as I was reading the book, somebody that really knew these 2 men, which was a cool thing to be able to kind of, have these stories almost be brought to life in real time today. So I appreciate that. In addition, and I think this was also such a powerful move in terms of how the material is laid out, as much as it is a lot of biographical information about these 2 great saints, it's laid out more in subject matter content. And that allows us, I think, to take examples from these 2 men and apply them into our own time and into our own lives. And that I think makes it much more practicable in terms of being able to use that in your own life today. So I'll start out by just reading the intro and then let you introduce these two great saints. In the history of England, no one looms larger than the Tudor monarch Henry VIII. He came to the throne in the first decade of the 16th century, a time of hope and relative peace. Initially considered the model Renaissance prince, he was handsome, debonair, multilingual, athletic, and pious. In fact, he was accorded the title of Defender of the Faith for his religious writings. Tragically, the arc of his reign would pivot to destruction. Surrounded by sycophants, driven by an obsessive desire for a male heir and unable to restrain his sexual appetite, he veered ineluctably into despotism. His will was imposed on everyone in every way. He taxed his country incessantly to support wars of aggression. He married 6 wives, impregnating his second before divorcing the first, and marrying the third the day after executing the second. His lust for sex was matched by his lust for power, solving the centuries-old problem of church and state by declaring himself head of both. Where once an itinerant preacher rose to fame by preaching, among other things, that his followers should render to Caesar that which belongs to Caesar, Henry declared his intention to make all things his own. And as we discussed, that's the opening section from your book, as we discussed before the podcast. Judge, every hero needs a great villain, and so the backdrop of these two saints, I think, would have been they both may have been well known in their time had it not been for Henry VIII and contributed to their community and to society. But it is because of the villain that is Henry VIII that I think that we get to experience these two great saints. So if you could, Judge, just tell us a little bit about who these two men are.
Starting with Henry VIII, part of the tragedy of this story is that Henry VIII and Thomas More started out as great friends, very involved in each other's lives. Henry would visit More at his home, and he enjoyed so much Thomas More being at the court that he would make up excuses for him to leave his house and come to the court to entertain him, to inform him, and to help him run his administration. And so at one point, they were close friends. And the interesting thing about More is, despite all that happened, at the end of his life, he died in his famous words, "The king's good servant, but God's first," but considered Henry a friend even at the point of execution. Likewise, John Fisher was the chaplain to Henry's grandmother, and may have even tutored Henry when he was a child. And so these two people who would live courageous lives of conviction, and when necessary in opposition to Henry's edicts, were executed by someone who at one point in their lives had been close friends with them.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I drew from your work is how this friendship really never faded for Thomas More. That it really all the way up into the chopping block, so to speak. He really continued to almost praise King Henry in a lot of ways, and would not talk badly of the king. Didn't become embittered by this whole situation of being put through this mockery of a trial and put into the tower and ultimately executed. Never changed this stance of all of a sudden kind of unleashing on Henry. And one of the things that I thought was a cool way of thinking about it in terms of how you brought it out was you talked about, in our current society, we have this notion of servant leadership. and that you want to serve one's followers. And in Moore's life, it was this notion of servant friendship, that he really did regard himself first and foremost as a servant of the king. And really the only reason that he could not do what Henry was asking him to do was because of his principles. His faith would not allow him to follow Henry where Henry wanted him to go. But there was never this kind of break on his end of the relationship of that friendship. And I thought that was a cool thing to bring out.
He also had this one of the remarkable things about both men is that they had this sense of eternal life hereafter, that was very real to both of them, and kind of informed their conduct and their thinking during their lives. And so Moore would look at somebody and see someone that was not just an enemy or an executioner or a judge or a corrupt judge. He would see a human being that had the potential to be his friend forever in heaven. And so he writes in his prayer book near the end of his life, in the prison, the tower cell, he writes that you should treat your worst enemy as if he were your best friend. For the brothers of Joseph could not have treated him better with their love and friendship than they did with their hatred and malice. And so he refused to have enemies.
And I think that was such a beautiful thing in terms of both men really kind of offering their forgiveness to those that had condemned them to death, to their executioners. Don't be worried about what you have to do, Mr. Executioner. Hopefully we'll both be, to get together in the afterlife here soon. And I think that is something that we can really draw out as lawyers, as a bar, because I think there's this tendency so often to see only short-sighted victories, to kind of look at, one case and give it way too much importance versus the relationships that are impacted from that, whether that's with your clients or with the, counsel that is sitting on the other side, making sure that you don't say anything that's going to put you, paint you in a negative light in the future in front of a judge that you may have to sit in front of many times. So I think there is, not only this healthy understanding of how our lives should be centered because of the promise of eternal life, but that short-sighted thinking just doesn't oftentimes pan out even in the here and now.
Yeah, ours is a competitive world. It's an adversarial system, and we go to battle over very important things. And we represent, as lawyers, we represent one side or the other, and that there's an intensity to that has an athletic parallel.
It does. It so does.
And just as we might admire an athlete who gives it all on the field, but then shakes hands and hugs with the opponent after the game, that's kind of the image for us lawyers, that we leave it. There's nothing we don't do in terms of zealously representing our clients, fighting for what we believe to be the right result, but then having a beer with our colleague after the trial's over. That sense of collegiality and professionalism is a very serious one.
It is. Yeah, and I think that, again, the putting too much emphasis on again, just I think one thing that makes Moore and Fisher so admirable in terms of that quality is there have been times, I think, that we've all felt like we got the justice wasn't served in the courtroom, or maybe even worse, that a colleague really did something to kind of undermine our position or kind of play dirty, so to speak. And most of us would respond with, again, just kind of, even if not in kind, at least distrust. And we're just going to kind of terminate this relationship. And, I think Fisher and Moore, that it's not only don't respond in kind, but come back to that with a attitude of forgiveness, which I think again showcases that faith and just a different perspective.
Yeah, it really is remarkable, because the sentences of execution that are imposed are just brutal, drawn and quartered, innards boiled while they're alive. And it's shocking just to read it. Can't imagine even hearing it. But both men, in response to it, are quick to forgive. Fisher says to his judges that they should be forgiven, for they know not what they do. And then Moore responds to his judges that just as the Apostle Paul was present at the stoning of Stephen and even held the coats for the people who did the stoning, he recognizes that both Paul and Stephen are now saints and friends together in heaven. And so he has this ability to say to the judges, though you are judges to my condemnation here on earth, there will be a day when we merrily spend the eternal life together. And that kind of perspective, that kind of goodwill is really aspirational, I think, for us.
It is. Yeah. I think that having that attitude is just, again, you really can only have that through grace, that attitude of forgiveness. But I think it is something that we should all strive for, especially in this kind of very competitive environment that we work in. It's just so important to have those heroes that are able to, again, not only not respond in kind, but take it one step further with this total forgiveness and recognizing the humanity of the other person, not really just kind of painting this caricature of a villain of opposing counsel, but recognizing this is a person that goes home to their family, that coaches or does other things in the community, having the ability to kind of just see beyond the case and what's going on in that courtroom and recognize the humanity, I think was something that, as you said, Moore and Fisher had the ability to really do well, was just remember that at the end of the day, these are all human beings that we are dealing with. And some that's so easy to forget, especially when we feel like we got stabbed in the back or something like that. It's so easy to not have that attitude. But these men are just such great examples of what is necessary when it comes to having the right perspective.
I think sometimes we get behind our laptops or our computers and we email these nasty letters back and forth, and it's so easy to do because there's something not quite human in that electronic conveyance, where you don't see that other person as the human being made in the image of God that he or she actually is. And sometimes it's harder to be that nasty in person because the true humanity of the other person is so much in the interaction. But that is Thomas More and John Fisher had the ability not to see someone who they were in conflict with, but to see someone who is their fellow son or daughter of God, and treat them with the respect we should pay to others, whether they agree with us or not, whether they're bent on beating us or imprisoning us or what. Moore and Fisher experienced all of the worst kind of persecution possible. And the thing that was characteristic about both of them, the word used more often than any other word, is they were merry. They were happy. They were imprisoned but free, persecuted but able to be humorous and courageous in the middle of it all. Some of the things that really attracted me to their stories.
Yeah, one section that I really like is on that humor. Um, uh, this is from the section of the book that you have titled "Condemned." G.K. Chesterton referred to Moore as the man who died laughing, which resonates with then Pope John Paul II's description of him when he declared Moore the patron of statesmen and politicians. There was, quote, harmony between the natural and supernatural, end quote, which enabled him to live his intense public life with a simple humility marked by good humor, even at the moment of his execution. Moore asked his executioner for help up the stairs of the scaffold, telling him he would see his own way down. He warned him of his short neck and asked that he strike clean. He kissed the executioner and told him, "Thou will give me this day greater benefit than ever any mortal man can be able to give me." And that humor, again, I just think it's such a powerful thing in terms of where the focus was for both of these men, because Fisher was similar in terms of getting all duded out for his execution. He put on a suit. I think one of my favorite stories, and it was a real gut check for me, was when the executioner came up and told him that he was going to be executed effectively in about 4 hours. And he responds, "Thank you," and then went back to sleep. I mean, it just shows the total belief in eternal life. Because again, most of us, I know myself, would be, just absolutely shaking in that moment. But here's a man who is totally committed to the next world and has their focus in the right place. So just again, that characterization of being Mary in these moments. And it's kind of like, how could you, it's one thing to die heroically, but it's a completely, mind-blowing thing to die under these circumstances, given the torture that you just described, happily.
Yeah, and their humor was not because they were just happy-go-lucky guys.
Right.
Fisher's pretty aesthetical. He's fasting. He's studying. He's writing sermons. He's a really serious guy, but he doesn't take himself too seriously. And Moore is referred to as the man for all seasons because of the famous play by Robert Bolt, which is actually a wonderful work of art. But it was the phrase "a man for all seasons" was originally used by one of his contemporaries to describe how brilliant he was, but how conversational at the same time, how overachieving he was in his professional life, but how he was geared towards friendship and full of humor. And so he was serious when he had to be serious, and mirthful and able to enjoy life even at its most difficult points. And so this well-balanced personality is, again, something that modern day lawyers can look at and strive to attain in their own life. There's so much stress in the practice of law that without a healthy balance and what interested me with these two men is not only were they the highest achieving men of their day. Moore was Lord Chancellor. Fisher was Chancellor for life of Cambridge University. No one around them were as successful in their professional accomplishments as they were. But both had more important concerns in terms of faith, in terms of family, in terms of friendship. It wasn't just, "Oh yeah, and I've got a family too," or "Oh yeah, I have to go to this dinner party because I'm Lord Chancellor." They loved their fellow human beings, both known for quality friendships. Moore was the ultimate intentional parent. And so despite all the time it would take to be excellent in their field. They were excellent in their relationships as well.
Yeah, and there's so many great examples in the book of how to be just a good human being based on the lives of these two men. But I think probably just because of your background in law, the book is, I would say, it's a great read for anybody. That, you know, anybody could take away life lessons from these two men, but I think it's a particularly great read for lawyers because, you know, since you're kind of looking at it from that angle, so to speak, I think that you draw out a lot from these two people that is particularly applicable to those of us practicing law. And to just kind of talk about a couple of examples of this, I think sometimes, you know, we in the legal profession, you know, have to be able to stand up for what is right, even when it's when you're the lone voice. And so the first example that I found compelling, even though there is a lawyer and a priest in this story, is from the priest who is appointed as counsel for the Queen in basically Henry's attempt to have legal permission to divorce her so that he can get remarried. And so this whole trial for advocating for his divorce appears to be a rubber stamp. He's already got all the votes. He's got everything lined up. It's a show trial to make it look like everybody is on board with this decision. And this is his, you know, best, what he's doing best for his country, that he's, you know, really taking a bullet for the team here by going through with this divorce. And it's not in any way, shape, or form based on his own, you know, sexual appetites and just wanting to have an heir to the throne. It's all couched in this very, you know, I'm doing this for my country. But it is John Fisher, the Queen's counsel, who is the one who stands up and objects, the initial lone objector. And Henry's response to this, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, is, "For you are but one man." And then just to read a small section here from the book, this testimony played out in the Legantine court foreshadows the exhilarating courtroom drama of our day. Attorneys plan their strategies, prepare their affidavits, rehearse their scripts, and then witnesses are called and testify, and everything changes. The Queen impresses, the King dissembles, and the certain outcome is cast into doubt. It is riveting. Counsel for the Queen, against all odds, steals victory from the jaws of defeat. The hand-chosen papal legates would rule against Henry. And that section, especially for "you are but one man," really stuck out because it's after that one man stands up that then you have a second person that feels comfortable enough to speak the truth, and a third person. It's so difficult to be the first person to stand up for the truth when nobody else is raising their voice, and much easier to be the second, third, fourth person that follows in that train. And we are a profession that is based on conscience and truth. At the end of the day, the goal of our legal system is that truth comes out in the courtroom, and that can only happen if we have the courage enough to speak up when we should, when an injustice is being done, when something isn't going right, when due process is not being followed. Somebody has to stand up and say very clearly, this is not going well. So it is from the priest that we have our first legal lesson.
Yeah, I love that. I love that story about John Fisher, and it resonates with the attorney side of me. You know, both in terms of Fisher being the representative of the Queen at the legate hearing in 1529. She's the Spanish queen of an English king that wants to get rid of her. And everybody in the English realm has been coerced onto the side of the king. And Catherine has no friend but Bishop John Fisher. And she even doubts him because he's English. And she's sure that maybe he also is part of this orchestrated effort to get this preordained result. So Fisher's representing this woman who is going against all the power of the kingdom and the king and the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Fisher's her only hope, her advocate, and he represents her zealously. The king says every bishop in the realm has supported my position on this divorce, and John Fisher stands up and says, "No, sir, not I. You have not my consent thereto." And the impact of that is just huge, both in terms of the outcome of that hearing. Now, Henry would go on to get his way through other means, but the courage of the advocate to stand alone and assert forcefully the position of his client wins the day for the day. And then Fisher was a brilliant man, had to know that standing and objecting would train the sights of the king on him in a way that would ultimately end badly for him. And yet he does it because what he said was, "For it was much against my conscience not to do it." And so this speaking truth to power, this stand on conscience, recognizing that the stand might have personal costs, but rather willing to face those costs than to speak against his conscience. That's great stuff. And you're right, Moore's the great attorney, and Moore's brilliant advocacy on his own behalf at his trial is worth reflecting on too. But 6 years before those trials, Fisher is standing alone on behalf of his client, speaking truth to power in a way that will ultimately lead to his execution, but will create an example for future advocates to follow, even to this day.
Yeah, and I think again, when we're stuck in that place of what is the right thing to do, what does our conscience tell us is the right thing to do, I think sometimes it's easy to go into this kind of cost benefit analysis of, if I speak up, will others follow me? Will the outcome ultimately be changed? And if not, then why risk all of this kind of capital, all of this, kind of honor capital that I have in furtherance of nothing? And for John Fisher, he was standing up because that was the right thing to do. Whether or not ultimately that hearing ended, for or against the Queen, it wasn't a matter of how that was going to impact the ultimate decision. It was, if nobody else had joined his decision to stand against Henry, it wouldn't have made any difference on his end. It was all about speaking the truth. Having said that, I do think that it is one of the places that, as Christian lawyers, to stand up for the truth in the right moments is important, because there is an opportunity then for other people to follow and have a ability to kind of stand on that ground with you. Again, doesn't change the fact that you would make that stand anyways, but it's again so much easier to be that second, third, fourth person that joins, and that ultimately the tide turns and justice is done in the courtroom because of that one person's stand for justice.
Yeah, and your reputation is built over time based upon each representation in court. And so every time you appear and you're prepared and you advocate zealously for your client and you speak the truth to power, every time you do that, it's a building block for a reputation that will emerge over time. And so, anybody who knew Fisher was not surprised that he was willing to do that. And so it was,
I think that's
perfectly consistent with his character.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful thing for old and young attorneys alike, that habitual ability to speak the truth it makes it easier as you go along to have that ability to speak the truth in the future. Fisher and Moore did not decide spur of the moment that they were going to stand against the king. It was a lifetime of little moments where honesty won the day, where truth came out, whether it was in their workplace, in their family life, in their interactions with their friends. It was in those small things that allowed them at these kind of great moments where all eyes are trained on them to be able to speak the truth. And so, maybe especially for young attorneys, it just gets easier to stand up for the truth the more you just make that a part of your practice. It's a lot easier to speak it the 50th time than it is the first. So I think that's an important thing to remember.
Another really admirable aspect of both men is that they weren't looking for a fight.
Right.
At one point in convocation, Bishop Fisher is willing to recognize the king's asserted leadership position in the church if the phrase was inserted, "so far as the law of God permits." And even though he might disagree with the king's assertion, he was willing to accept the assertion with that phrase. Moore saw the handwriting on the wall in terms of the king's great matter and recognized that the conflict would preclude him from being an effective Lord Chancellor. And so he resigned his office and went to live at his home in Chelsea in retirement, in his words, to concentrate on the passion of Christ and to leave all politics aside. And so both men went out of their way to avoid the conflict. But when pushed too far, they stood up, and their opposition wasn't knee-jerk. Both men spent years studying the theological and political implications of the king's great matter. They studied the scriptures, they studied the church fathers, and it was only after years of study that their conscience was formed in such a way that they couldn't do anything but resist. And so there's so many lessons there in terms of preparation, in terms of the hard work it takes to form the right opinion in a case, in a matter. And for lawyers, it's not rushing to the fight, but preparing for the fight. And these men did that so well. Their consciences were so clearly formed that it gave them the courage to do what they needed to do in defense of truth.
To that point, Judge, I'm just going to read one section from the chapter titled "Condemned." One of the lessons flowing from the lives of Fisher and Moore is that the pursuit of truth is a costly thing. It costs energy to study and come to an understanding of the truth. One is then challenged to pursue the truth, which is often costly in terms of loss of position, human respect, and potentially one's life. Those in power insist that people of faith ignore the truth. The coercion, subtle at first, grows in intensity, demanding that one conform and acquiesce to power. Fisher and Moore felt that demand and bent to it to the extent possible. Fisher was willing to swear to an oath subject to the limitation as far as the law of God permits. Moore was willing to resign the Lord Chancellorship and retire to Chelsea. But pushed too far, they would bend no more. And here we find them, first imprisoned, then interrogated, tried, and now subject to condemnation. They suffered much and lost everything, but their spirits were strong and their essence was revealed in these last days. Moore's response to interrogation sets the scene. My whole study shall be on the passion of Christ. I do nobody harm. I say no harm. I think none harm, but wish everybody good. And if that be not enough to keep a man alive, in good faith, I long not to live. After the pronouncement of guilt, Fisher said, truly, my lords, if that which I have before spoken be not sufficient, I have no more to say, but only to desire Almighty God to forgive them that have condemned me, for I think they know not what they have done.
Pretty amazing.
It is pretty amazing. You've done such a great job in terms of laying out where that line of truth needs to get drawn, because I do think it's important, as you said, some of us lawyers, especially those that are on the trial end of things, look to pick a fight in everything, right? That's just part of our nature, is we want to contest everything, not let something into evidence that shouldn't be put into evidence, fight every fight. And, there's a time and a place for that. But the amazing thing about these two men, I really do agree with you, is that it wasn't to just stand on the side of the street and yell from a loudspeaker that King Henry should be put down and he's not treating women well. I mean, it wasn't this kind of, stand on your soapbox and shout. It was very much thoughtful about, where is the time and place? What can I do to protect my own family and my own community? But at the same time, there comes that point where you can't give any more. And there's a line that is drawn, and that's the moment that they recognize. But there was a lot of, I think, wisdom in not pushing that, not trying to themselves draw that line in the sand, but try everything possible to resign their positions, basically give up for more in a lot of ways, to go into poverty in order to avoid having to do what it was that King Henry wanted him to do, and to give up everything, so that it's kind of like, if you want to proceed forward with this, find somebody else to stand in my place and support you. That's your choice. But there was never this line drawn in the sand by Fisher and Moore.
Yeah, there's a real exercise of prudence, in meekness. And I've heard meekness defined as restrained strength. And so meekness is not a bad characteristic, but a wise restraint of the strength that you otherwise possess. And so having accommodated the king in every way possible, once they're at the breaking point, they know that they can go forward with a clear conscience, courage of their convictions, and trust that that whatever befalls them comes through them, through the hands of a God who, is powerful enough to change the circumstance, loving enough to want the best for them, and wise enough to order it in a different way if that were his will. And so one of the neat things about these men is they're free to pursue the truth, to follow their conscience, because they're confident that the loving, all-powerful God they serve would change the circumstances if different circumstances were better for them. And so Moore tells his daughter Meg, no matter how bad it looks, it's the best because it flows through the hands of God. And he says that from a tower cell, having been separated from his family for a year, he still believes and claims that it's the best thing for him, because God wouldn't have let it happen if it wasn't. And so that's a very freeing, liberating mindset.
It is. I mean, that mindset of detachment, of being free because of having a proper understanding of worldly pleasures, honor, power, money, position, whatever it might be, is something that both of these saints do give us such a great example of. Back to the book for just a brief moment. Detachment enabled Moore to live consistently with his principles. Indeed, Pope St. John Paul II cites it as a ground for declaring Moore heavenly patron of statesmen and politicians. His profound detachment for honors and wealth, his serene and joyful humility, his balanced knowledge of human nature and of the vanity of success, his certainty of judgment rooted in faith, these all gave him that confident inner strength that sustained him in adversity and in the face of death. I think that mindset is so important for, I would say, particularly the legal profession today, to have a proper detachment to honors and to position and to finances, because that is something that many of us find ourselves in a kind of legal profession. I think I had mentioned this earlier, but in a legal profession that is kind of dominated by this idea of the super lawyer, right? Of what list are you a part of? What groups are you a member of? What with entry, associate attorney, finances constantly on the rise, and partnership, equity partnership, ultimate income being, very much on the rise at this point in a good economy. I think it is so easy to get sucked into the power and money and honor that comes along with being an attorney. And it's really difficult to imagine having the, kind of the financial security and position that Thomas More had, and recognizing what it would do to his family and to his, those that worked on his estate, recognizing what it would do to those people to walk away from that, but having the proper detachment to not put your own kind of needs from this world before what ultimately matters. These are just such great examples of that.
There's a great interaction between Thomas More and his son-in-law, John Roper, in which Roper is expressing to More how amazing it is that More is the king's good friend, and Lord Chancellor, and More kind of chuckles and tells his younger man, his son-in-law, I wouldn't be too proud of that. If my head could win him a castle in France, it would be sure to go. Just the realism, and that response, and Fisher likewise. It was the pattern of that day for a cleric to become a pastor of a parish, then a bishop of a small diocese, and ultimately bigger and bigger promotions. And Fisher would have none of that. He was the bishop in the poorest diocese in England, Rochester, and he had opportunity to act like his peers and be appointed to bigger and bigger positions. And his response was that I would not trade my poor widow for the richest bride in England, and he felt vocationally fulfilled riding his horse through the villages in his diocese, ministering to the poorest of the poor, and didn't need any advancement. And so that was the attitude of these guys. God orchestrated the circumstances of their life so that they made powerful decisions on the biggest stage possible, but that was never their intent. Their intent was to do what they were doing in the moment well, and to love the people, that God had put in their way to minister to. And it's kind of interesting that they were so successful without being ambitious. Again, I think great lessons for us today.
Yeah, it is such a dichotomy to see these two people that are, as you indicated earlier, really at the top of their respective fields in terms of the position and respect that they have earned, and yet just don't seem consumed at all by a desire to kind of be at the top or to remain at the top or to increase. And again, that love of fellow human being, I think, is one of the reasons probably that they got to those positions, but also primarily why they don't care if they are lost. And I think that's really where in a profession that offers the ability for us to be able to serve, whether that is to really go in and work hard for our clients, to represent people pro bono, to make a difference in our community through donations of time or money or whatever it might be. There is just a real opportunity, I think, for us because of being in the service industry. I mean, at the end of the day, the law profession is a service industry. And if we can keep that service first mindset, fellow human being first mindset, as opposed to how is this going to increase the bottom line, and how is this going to allow me to kind of become, as I joke, top 80 under 80, is the next the next big award. But how do you kind of avoid that type of a mindset? I think it's not something that you just sit down one day and become detached. This was, again, a lifelong lesson for both of these men. I think for Fisher, you can see through his ascetic practices that this is something that he was kind of building up to, mentally, of depriving himself of the pleasures of the world. Or that detachment is just such a long-term process. And I think that that's one of the things, again, to really put that into practice as much as possible on a daily basis, so it does become easier to not get too caught up in what your income is in a profession that allows for a very healthy income, or what your different awards and honors are going to be in this profession as well.
Yeah, that desire for the respect of your peers and acknowledgement of your success is something that more in Fisher's lives teach us to avoid. And so far better to treat the next client that walks in the door as the most important person on the earth, and to do in the smallest of cases, to do the very best possible job you can do, and then to be satisfied that you've treated your fellow human being well and worked as best as you can. And that is its own reward, as opposed to working for the applause of others. The former is so deeply satisfying and has its own reward. The latter is more talks about ambition being a serpent, and that at first you want to be near the best, and then you want to be the best, and then you want to be better than the best, and there's no satisfaction in it. The sense that John Fisher had of trying to be the holy person that he was encouraging his parishioners to be, and not worrying about future advancement. That's where vocational fulfillment comes, I think.
Right, exactly.
That's where, at the end of the day, you're deeply satisfied.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, most of us that get into the practice of law, from everybody that kind of discussed this during law school, or when you hear, especially younger lawyers talk about this, most of us get into the law practice for the right reasons. We want to help people. We want to make a difference in people's lives, want to, make a difference in our communities, but somewhere along the way, whether it's the weight of law school loans, or struggling in practice, or not being fulfilled maybe with the practice area that we are involved in, somewhere along the way, sometimes those aspirational reasons that we want to become lawyers kind of falls to the wayside. And I think the best way out of that mess is to really do a bang up job for somebody. I had a moment the other day where we got a great result in the courtroom for a client. And when I walked out of the courtroom, he was standing outside the courtroom. He had tears in his eyes, and we shared a hug, which I have missed through the COVID situations. The lawyer client hug, but that to me is like the most kind of powerful moment as an attorney, is that level of kind of interaction where you just feel that human connection with another person, and that can drive you for a pretty good long time if you experience that moment.
I had an experience like that, but it wasn't law related. I had a granddaughter, a 5-year-old granddaughter, that asked me to sing her a lullaby so that she sing her to sleep. Now, if anybody who's heard my voice, there's nobody in the world that would want me to do that. But so I sang a song to my granddaughter, and she fell asleep. And so I'm at her bedside looking at her. She's just angelic in, closed eyes and sound asleep. And because I have sang her a song, that was one of my greatest accomplishments, one of my greatest career accomplishments ever. Nobody but she and I knew about that accomplishment. It wasn't done on any big stage. It was a very small but deeply satisfying thing. Much more rewarding to me as a human being than some award I might win through the bar.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned earlier, that's really what is so, again, incredible about Fisher and Moore, is that they were able to appropriately prioritize where their family, their God stood in relationship to their careers. And I think most Christians, and I'm gonna put myself in the same level, we want to kind of say out loud that, well, God is first, family is second, and then, my job is third. But when you look at our lives, it's like, well, that doesn't really match up. It's, profession is clearly first, family is second, maybe God at the, is there for an hour on Sundays. And I think that's one of those questions that we really have to be honest about in terms of assessing, the maybe the gap between where we say our priorities lie and where they actually are. And for Moore and Fisher, there's no gap. It was this really was where the priorities lie.
One of the lessons that just screams at me from Moore's life is the role he played in his family. He really was an intentional parent, and it wasn't something he did when everything else was taken care of. He had his own children from his first wife, who died young. He had a stepdaughter from his second wife when he married her. She had a nurse who died, and they adopted that nurse's child. And then a ward of the state was given to their family. So they had this bustling family of kids, and sometimes his service to the crown meant that he was going overseas or out of the country on diplomatic missions and would be away for a month at a time. And he would write daily letters to each of his children and expect them to write him. And when he wasn't in town, he hired world-class tutors to teach them. And in fact, he took the position, unique in his day, that his daughters would receive the same level of education as his sons, that there was nothing about a girl that should deprive her of the advantage of education that a boy received. And so his daughters were trained to the same degree as his sons. In fact, his daughter became one of the most respected Greek scholars of her day, in a day where women just didn't do that. And so I had always heard that Moore had bought into home education and had educated his kids to be successful. But I never realized the extent of that commitment, which was a primary commitment in his life. And, as busy as we are, and as much as the law demands of us, if we're going to be good at what we do, to recognize that our real legacy is in the family and friends that we invest in. That was a real powerful lesson that I drew from these lives.
It is, and you do a wonderful job in the book laying that out, and I can't encourage everybody listening enough to go out and get a copy of this book about John Fisher and Thomas More. It really is a great read. I mean, it's very entertaining. There's really great storytelling power that you bring to this. I feel like, again, the research that you've done into the lives of these two men allowed you to present them as people that you know very well, and so it allowed for me to read it that way. But the life lessons and the way that it is broken down, really in subject matter, is so powerful. So go get your copy of this great work, Keeping Their Souls While Losing Their Heads. It really is a great read for us as lawyers, but more importantly, as human beings. So very, very grateful, very, very honored to have you on the podcast, Judge Conrad, to speak about these two men, and very, very much, again, encourage everybody to go get a copy of that book.
Well, Jake, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to do these podcasts and to reach out to your fellow lawyers in a way that enhances their lives. And so you don't have to do it. You're willing to do it. And it's a very Fisher and Moore like thing that you're doing.
I appreciate it, Judge. They're the heroes. So that's that. We all need some good heroes in our lives, and it's good to have people front and center that you can look up to and respect, and very much have that sense about you in terms of having had the honor to work with you in law school, and be able to kind of observe how you operate and function on the bench, as well as with your amazing team of clerks that you had at the time, but also have some great heroes that you've been able to kind of give rebirth to, so to speak, by being able to bring their stories to bear. So I very much appreciate it, Judge.
Well, G.K. Chesterton said back in the early part of the 20th century, as Thomas More was under consideration for canonization in the Catholic Church, he said that he might be more important than at any point in time before, even at the point of his execution, but he will be even more important 100 years from now. And so we're kind of in that 100 years from now.
I loved that quote. That was, it seemed like ridiculously prophetic, but it was such a great,
as G.K. Chesterton often is.
Yeah, no, it was. And that is such an amazing, amazing thing to think about, the legacy that you leave behind. Again, it's not that was clearly not Moore's intention, but again, I think he truly is a man for all seasons, in that the lessons that we can draw from his life about how to live, how to be a person of service, how to be a person of faith, just continues to get more and more attractive in Christian lifestyle. So it's just a cool thing to be able to see, again, how prophetic that statement is.
Great. Thanks, Jack.
If you found the information in this podcast to be valuable, I simply ask that you pay it forward and share this podcast with another member of the legal community. Also, if you would leave us a rating or a review on whatever platform you are listening on, I would greatly appreciate it.